But what has your experience led you to conclude in terms of the difference of training preparation for an elite climber who is aiming for the Olympics versus something outside on V17 kind of standard on rock? Are there key differences? Because I would suspect everyone who's listening, or maybe even watching, will think, oh, it's just all the same. It's all freaking hard. I bet you they train the same way, especially because they see people jump between the disciplines and also do really well.
Yeah, it's I would say it's more pressure for the comp athlete, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily psychologically easier. It's a weird thing to say that. But in terms of training, yes, there's three main things in terms of the Olympics, which you don't necessarily get in terms of outdoor climbing, whether you're training someone for 9B plus, routes, 9A boulder, whatever. I think the new format is all about volume, and it's about having effectively durability of performance. And by durability of performance, I mean what maximum power output, power endurance output can you do at the start of a session and at the end of the session, the start of the week, at the end of the week. The best athletes in the world, and a lot of this language comes from cycling. Tadej Pogačar, Tour de France cyclist, Tour de France winner, Vingegaard, both the same. Their power output after 10 kilometers over a short sprint or short power period of several minutes is the same after 10 kilometers it is after 150 kilometers of steady state riding. So they can be up near their aerobic threshold for 150 kilometers and still produce exactly the same power output because the durability is so good. And that's based on all their energy systems training. So why does that relate to the new format of Olympics is, say next year we've got the OQS, which is the Olympic qualifying series. It's 3 events over 3 months, 1 week event, 3 weeks off, 1 week event, 3 weeks off, 1 week event. And you've got qualifiers, semis and finals of boulder and lead. And they're pretty stacked close together. So you've got athletes that need to be able to perform on boulders back to back to back, perform on routes, perform on boulders, perform routes, perform boulders, routes. And if you think about that, like even this World Cup season, I think athletes need to strategize in terms of what World Cups they go to. And the younger ones, as you saw, definitely went to everything, and I think they slightly paid the price for it. But the OQS is mandatory, and you have to perform at the 3 events if you want to go to the Olympics and you haven't qualified already. So that durability to keep performing and keep having a high power output on the final route on the final day is really critical. And I don't think enough climbers are doing that at the moment, particularly comp climbers and particularly boulderers, and that's why they're struggling with the combined format. The second element is the broad movement range. So you can be a specialist in certain ways, like I said before, in terms of whether you're static, whether you're really fast and powerful, whether you've ability to hang on, but you can't be a movement specialist anymore. And if you got a movement specialist, all it takes is for the wrong boulder set to arrive and you score next to nothing, and then that's your combination score done. Really good example, recent World Cup in Bern, Mikel on the French team, fantastic win. He's 33 years old, twice the age of Serato, who came fourth, and absolutely brilliant. But not to take anything away from him, but those movement patterns for him were absolutely ideal in that winning in that series and in that competition. The rest of the World Cups, he wasn't exactly podiuming all the time. He didn't do that well, and that just happened to be really good. So he's kind of won out on that. If he had that level of ability on all movement patterns, he should be performing every week and weekend, week in, week out. So broad movement range is critical. And then lastly is what you don't get outside is you can strategize where you are planning on getting to and the type of training you do to get to on these climbs. So a really good example is if you went through a load of athletes in the World Cups, I can generally tell you what their wall length is like or what their training's like based on where they fall off on the routes. So the first third is usually technical. It's there to scare the athletes, make them over grip. And they actually break this up into colours now, which is quite defined. I think it's always quite funny that it's so obvious, but it's great. So the first bit, it's all about like getting people a bit more worried, a bit more scared. And the confident ones, the more experienced ones, are always a lot more relaxed there. The middle third is very bouldery. It's becoming way more traverse based. It's bigger holds, macros, using the full body. And then the top half is fighting. The athletes that are always seeming to be maybe getting finals, just getting into semis, this could be my time to perform, but they never seem to quite push. They don't train for that fight at the end. They're only training for the 3/4 mark or 2/3. And that means they're usually on shorter walls, or they're not training how to fight hard enough all the time in their training. That's one thing that Jakob Schubert, Toby, I don't think I've actually seen Serrato have to fight yet, but Serrato, they can fight on a head wall. And I don't think many of the athletes know how to do that, and they don't train for that. They train to climb on harder moves. And when they're off almost. But the ones who can like dip their shoulders into the wall, have a quick shake and keep fighting, they're the ones that get through that top head wall. But you could strategize. If you're a really good boulderer, you could race up to the 3/4 mark. You'll probably do all right overall if you do really well in the boulder. It's risky, but that is another element, is like what you're actually training for on these lead routes. Outside, you're training to get to the top every time, and everything has to be about that. But in comps, you're training to get points.
The output of what you need to do to perform now in that difference of Olympic format, especially with this combined format, and especially so the last Olympic cycle that had speed, lead and boulder going into it, produces a really different demand on the preparation that goes into that, because they are very different. Even though on the surface you go, well, these are both elite level performances, these are the best climbers in the world, and they're diverging more and more, I think, now, because especially as people build careers out of it and people have longer times actually training multiple years for each of those outcomes, that itself is defining a different set of athletes. And naturally, because on competition stuff, the route setters have to create challenge for the type of athlete that they're seeing, and that athlete is evolving over time, it's going to diverge even more, because the rock is fixed and those problems out there always exist that way. But the route setting will always change according to styles and demands and how the sport evolves. And I think that's a really interesting element to how we see it.
I think one thing to consider is that they are both good at both scenarios, apart from the mental side, in my opinion. I do think we can see this divergence, particularly on the more dynamic side of climbing. I think the dynamic level which you get outside isn't quite the same, but the Japanese climbers have proved that wrong. They go to rocklands, they're jumping between everything. Tomorrow's great outside. But like a good example is Toby goes outside and he's trying to climb 9B plus, and Jakob just trying to climb 9C. He's got that ability to go outside and climb hard. I mean, Jakob's boulder list is ridiculous outside in his performance. But vice versa, Aidan this winter totally burnt off Toby in winter training on comp blocks, and Aidan thinks he's got better at comp climbing since he's been outdoors and focused, because he's just got a better climber. And we're talking super dynamic, hard movements. But the ability for Toby and Jakob they might just not be as into doing the really long projects, and Aidan definitely isn't into that comp pressure anymore. So I think that it's the personality, crowd, what you enjoy, the mental pressure side that stands out to me more. I actually don't think the physical capabilities of the athlete is that different. And it's not as different as we maybe think it can be, having worked with people mixing both up.